All right, so today we're diving headfirst into a situation that feels like it's one wrong step away from, well, exploding.
Yeah, the whole Israel-Iran thing, right. It's been tense for years, but it feels like things are getting especially heated right now.
Exactly, totally. So let's set the scene for our listeners just to make sure everyone's on the same page. We've got Israel and Iran locked in this, I don't know, decades-long standoff. And recently, things have escalated pretty dramatically. We've got the ongoing conflict with Hezbollah, the situation in Gaza, and now this whole soft strike thing that Israel pulled.
Right, that's the part that has everyone talking. It's not typical of how Israel usually operates.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that. For those who haven't been following every twist and turn, Israel basically told Iran, hey, we're going to hit these specific military targets. And then they did. But they didn't go after any major infrastructure like nuclear facilities or oil refineries.
Yeah, and they apparently relayed the message through the Dutch Foreign Ministry. Like, imagine getting a heads up about an incoming airstrike from a completely different country.
It's wild, right? It almost feels polite. Like, excuse me, but we're about to bomb you. Just wanted to let you know.
Yeah, it's not exactly your typical military operation, but that's what makes it so fascinating, right? There's clearly a strategy at play here, something much deeper than just trying to avoid civilian casualties.
So, break it down for us. Why would Israel, known for their, direct approach, go for what seems like a soft strike?
I think there are a few reasons. First, by informing Iran, they instantly shift the narrative. They become the responsible actor, the ones showing restraint. If Iran retaliates strongly after being given a heads up, well, they're the ones who look like the aggressor on the world stage.
Okay, so it's about controlling the optics, the international perception of their actions.
Exactly. It's a smart PR move, basically. But there's more to it than that. Remember, Israel is a tiny country surrounded by, let's just say, not-so-friendly neighbors. They have to choose their battles carefully.
So they're picking their spots, waiting for the right moment to strike with full force.
It's possible, but I think there's also a longer-term strategy at play here, something beyond just military objectives. They're aiming to weaken Iran, not just physically, but also internally.
Now that's interesting. Explain that a bit more.
Think about it from the perspective of an average Iranian citizen. You see your government, which has been boasting about its military might and defiance of the West, getting hit, and they do nothing in response. What does that do to your trust in that government?
It would definitely raise some questions, yeah. Make you wonder if they're as strong as they claim to be.
Exactly. And that seed of doubt, that sense of vulnerability can be incredibly powerful. It can erode public support for the regime, embolden those who are already pushing for change.
So it's like a psychological operation as much as a military one.
Absolutely. They're playing the long game, hoping to create cracks in the foundation of the Iranian government. And remember, Iranian society is not a monolith. There are deep divisions within the country, different factions, different ideologies, all vying for power.
Right. We talked about that earlier, about the tensions between the hardliners and those who are more open to reform.
Exactly. And these strikes by Israel could play right into those internal power struggles.
Right. Okay, so we've got Israel playing this multi-layered game, aiming to weaken Iran, both militarily and internally. But there's another factor we haven't even touched on yet, right? The U.S. presidential election just weeks away.
Ah, yes, the elephant in the room. The outcome of that election could dramatically change the landscape for both Israel and Iran.
Big time. Because let's face it, U.S. foreign policy has been pretty, let's say, inconsistent lately. So how do you see things playing out, depending on who wins?
Well, if Biden wins, he's made it pretty clear he wants to rejoin the Iran nuclear deal, which would likely lead to a more diplomatic approach to the situation. That could put pressure on Israel to hold back on any further military action.
But if Trump wins a second term?
Well, that's where things could get a little more unpredictable. Trump has been pretty hawkish towards Iran, so a second term could embolden Israel to take even bolder action, knowing they have a more supportive U.S. administration.
So basically, everyone's holding their breath, waiting to see how the U.S. election shakes out before making their next move.
Pretty much, yeah. It's a high-stakes game of wait and see right now, and the outcome could have major implications, not just for the Middle East, but for the whole world.
It's a lot to process, for sure. But that's why we're here, right? To try to make sense of it all.
Exactly. We need to understand all the pieces of the puzzle to see how they fit together.
And There are a lot of pieces to this puzzle. We haven't even talked about the role of Russia and China in all of this.
Oh, yeah, they're definitely not just sitting on the sidelines watching this unfold. They've got their own interests in the region, their own games to play, and those games are getting a lot more complicated with every move Israel makes.
Okay, we are definitely going to need more time to unpack all of this.
Yeah, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Just neutral observers in all this.
Not at all. They're making their own calculations, trying to figure out how to leverage the situation to their advantage, which, is what countries tend to do.
Makes sense. So let's break it down one player at a time. Let's start with Russia. What's their angle here?
Well, Russia's been trying to reassert itself as a major power in the Middle East for, like a decade now. They've been building alliances, selling weapons, generally trying to counter U.S. influence, and Iran's a key part of that strategy.
So a weakened Iran, which seems to be what Israel's aiming for, wouldn't really be in Russia's best interest.
Right. On the surface, no. It would definitely limit their leverage in the region, especially if Iran's less able to, push back against the U.S. and its allies. But there's another side to this, too. Like, sometimes chaos can actually work in your favor.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. How does that work?
Think about it. A prolonged conflict, even if Iran's losing, creates a ton of instability, right? And instability often leads to higher oil prices. And guess who benefits from higher oil prices? Russia, a major energy exporter.
So they're in a tricky spot. On the one hand, they want their ally Iran to be strong. But on the other, they're also kind of low-key benefiting from all this chaos.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance, which makes it really hard to predict what their next move might be. China, on the other hand, they're playing a longer, more subtle game.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Like, they've been pretty quiet on the whole Israel-Iran situation, but they're definitely not just ignoring it.
Oh, no, not at all. China's approach is, I'd say, primarily economic. They're pouring money into infrastructure projects across the Middle East, trying to, secure trade routes, lock down access to resources, that kind of thing. Their whole Belt and Road Initiative, that's a prime example.
So for China, stability equals profit. A big, messy conflict would throw a wrench into their whole plan.
Definitely. But they're also, let's be honest, pretty opportunistic. Like, they're watching the U.S. potentially pulling back from the region, and they're seeing that as an opening.
To swoop in and become the new power broker.
Potentially, yeah. They could position themselves as the reliable partner, the one who brings stability and investment, But it's a tightrope walk. They need to keep both Iran and Israel happy while still pushing their own agenda.
Man, it's like everyone's playing 4D chess here. It's making my head spin. But okay, so we've got these external forces at play, but what about the situation inside Iran itself? We talked a bit about the tension between the people and the hardliners, but it seems like there's even more to it than that, right?
Yeah, Iranian society is super complex. It's not just one big homogenous group. You've got different ethnicities, religious sects, political ideologies, all kind of jostling for power. And these soft strikes that Israel's carrying out, they might seem minor from the outside, but they could actually have a big impact on those internal dynamics.
So how exactly could these strikes shift the balance of power within Iran?
Imagine you're part of the hardline faction, right? Your whole power base is built on projecting strength, resisting the West, controlling the narrative. Then Israel hits you and you don't do anything. Makes you look weak.
And that creates an opportunity for other groups to challenge their authority.
Exactly. Reformists, people who want more engagement with the West, they could use this to their advantage. They could point to these strikes as evidence that the hardliners' approach isn't working. It's a risky move for Israel, though, because they can't fully control how those internal dynamics will play out.
Right. It's like they're trying to light a fuse, but they don't know exactly what kind of explosion they're going to get.
Right. And then, of course, there's the elephant in the room, the Iranian nuclear program. That's always lurking in the background.
Yeah, can't forget about that. That's the ultimate wild card. Because Israel has made it very, very clear that they will not accept a nuclear-armed Iran.
Absolutely. They see it as an existential threat. And they've shown in the past that they're willing to take military action to stop other countries in the region from developing nukes.
But Iran insists their nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. So who do we believe?
It's tough to say for sure. There's a lot of mistrust on both sides. The 2015 nuclear deal was supposed to, limit Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for lifting sanctions, but that fell apart when Trump pulled the U.S. out. And since then, things have just been getting more and more tense.
Right, and that nuclear issue is like the biggest sticking point of all.
Absolutely. It's like a giant game of chicken with each side pushing closer and closer to the edge.
And nobody wants to blink first. So
Yeah.
where does this all lead? What are the possible outcomes here?
Well, that's where things get really interesting because there are a few different ways this could play out. And each scenario has huge implications, not just for the region, but for the whole world. So buckle up because it's about to get even more intense.
Okay, so where do we go from here? We've got Israel making these calculated moves, Iran dealing with internal pressures, Russia and China kind of playing both sides. And then there's that whole nuclear thing looming over everything. It feels like there are a million different ways this could all go sideways.
Yeah, there's no easy answer here. It's a really volatile situation, and predicting the future is, well, impossible. But I think we can look at a few potential scenarios based on what we've talked about. And I guess the most likely one, unfortunately, is continued stalemate.
So more of the same, like these low-level clashes, a war of words, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Israel might keep hitting these carefully chosen targets in Iran, trying to disrupt their military and stir up trouble internally, but without actually triggering a full-blown war. And Iran, they might retaliate in some limited ways, maybe through proxies like Hezbollah, but they'll probably avoid a direct confrontation that could spiral out of control.
But that doesn't really solve anything, does it? It just kicks the can down the road.
Yeah.
And all the while, that nuclear threat is just ticking away.
Right, and that's the big danger with a stalemate. It creates this fragile equilibrium that could be shattered at any moment. Any miscalculation, any unexpected event could lead to a rapid escalation.
Okay, so stalemate is one possibility and not a very good one. What else could happen?
Another scenario, and this one's definitely a lot more worrying, is a gradual escalation of the conflict. Imagine Israel, maybe feeling emboldened if Trump gets reelected, decides to hit a more sensitive target in Iran, something directly connected to their nuclear program.
And that would basically guarantee a major response from Iran, right?
Yeah, almost certainly. At that point, Iran might feel like they have no choice but to hit back hard. They could attack U.S. bases in the region, target oil tankers, unleash Hezbollah on a much larger scale. Things could get really ugly really fast.
So stalemate or escalation, those are our options. No chance of a peaceful resolution.
Well, there's one more scenario, but it's the most optimistic and honestly the least likely. It would require a massive shift in the political landscape, both in the region and globally. Imagine a new leadership in Iran comes to power, one that's less hostile to the West, or a major diplomatic push led by the US, Europe, Russia, and China, putting pressure on both sides to negotiate.
But let's be real, is that even remotely possible, given all the bad blood between Israel and Iran?
It would be incredibly difficult for sure. It would take a ton of compromise from everyone involved, a willingness to set aside old grudges and focus on the bigger picture. But hey, history's full of surprises, right? We've seen seemingly impossible conflicts resolved through diplomacy before. It's a long shot, but it's not completely out of the question.
Okay, so we've got these three potential paths. Stalemate, escalation, or a long shot chance at peace. But why should our listeners care? This is all happening thousands of miles away. How does it affect them?
Because the outcome of this conflict could have ripple effects that touch all of our lives. We're not just talking about a regional squabble here. We're talking about a region that's vital for global energy supplies, trade routes, international stability. A major war in the Middle East would send shockwaves through the entire world. It would affect economies, political alliances, even our personal security.
Yeah, it's easy to just tune out the news and pretend it's not happening. But you're saying we can't afford to do that.
Exactly. This is something that demands our attention, our understanding. The choices made by leaders in Israel, Iran, the US, they're going to have consequences for all of us. By staying informed, by talking about these issues, we can contribute to a more informed public discourse and hopefully a more peaceful future.
So what's the one key takeaway you want to leave our listeners with? What should we be watching for in the coming months, the coming years?
I'd say watch for any signs of change, both good and bad. Pay attention to what leaders are saying, what governments are doing. Are tensions escalating, or are there any hints of dialogue, de-escalation? Are hardliners tightening their grip on power, or are we seeing any progress towards reform? The answers to those questions will tell us a lot about which direction this conflict is headed.
And ultimately, we all have a role to play in shaping that direction, even if it's just through staying informed and engaged.
Absolutely. The future isn't set in stone. It's shaped by the choices we make, both as individuals and as a global community. And the more we understand about complex issues like this, the better choices we can make.
Well, that's a powerful thought to end on. Thank you for taking us on this deep dive into the Israel-Iran conflict. It's been, well, a little unsettling, but incredibly insightful.
It's been my pleasure. It's always a good reminder that the more we learn, the more we realize how much more there is to learn.
And that's what keeps things interesting, right? So until next time.